The Young and the Restless spoilers tease that Summer's dalliances with two men could easily produce a pregnancy. A choice of daddy for her first baby would be Billy, while Kyle would be a distant second. Sure, it's fair to say that Summer hasn't been with both men as of mid-August. But give her time. There's no doubt that Kyle wants Summer. As a matter of fact, he's made a bet to win her romantic admiration back. If she can't get Billy, Summer has agreed to become Kyle's girlfriend. If Kyle loses the wager, he'll be forced to relinquish his sweet ride sports car. Summer's proposed pregnancy would simply be a surprise if Kyle proves to be the father. They went steady, an old-fashioned term to be sure, for a while a few years ago. Each character is early 20-something, somewhat suited to the other, and possesses the resources to provide generously for Sil's offspring. However, if Billy is the genetic father, all of Genoa City will be rocked. Silly's baby would stun the masses and create wild havoc for months to come. So, it appears likely that a theorized set of linked storylines would be written, meaning that the question of paternity would be raised and then held high for an extended time. That soapy scenario would withhold the true father's identity in order to build momentum toward the eventual reveal. Since returning to town, Summer has been fully disruptive. She recently told Phyllis that the attitude being evidence was developed. Summer decided to stop being a perceived doormat and instead go after all desired goals, using whoever was necessary. All resulting consequences were classified by a word: whatever. Speaking of Phyllis, just imagine the betrayed rage she would project to the audience. Billy and Summer would surely receive the full force of old Phyllis, meaning the fierce personality Michelle Stafford formerly presented as that character. Nick and Sharon as the stepmother, would be supportive of a Sil baby. Yes, that little boy, or girl would be unexpected. But Shikar stand-up parents and would welcome the grandchild. Simultaneously, Summer's biological mother, Phyllis, would welcome Summer's baby as well. She'd also likely be relieved because that would free Billy of his stalker. Jack would be overjoyed that his one-time stepdaughter and one-time presumed bio-child was having his son's baby. Kyle's mother, Diane, would continue to look down on him from the afterlife, probably offering no otherworldly response. At Neil's penthouse, Nate performed a handstand against the wall. The doorbell rang, and he called out that it was open. Nikki walked in, and he worriedly asked if everything was okay. She informed him that she was fine, but it was her daughter she was concerned about, and she confessed that she'd lied to him. Nikki inquired whether anything she told Nate as his patient would stay between them, and he assured her that her personal medical information would stay private, but he wasn't sure what she was getting at. Nikki asked if it would be like confessing to a priest who couldn't tell anyone else, and Nate joked that his statutes wouldn't prevent him from squealing if she was a serial killer wanted by Interpol. She nervously laughed, and he guessed that there was something troubling her enough to want to confide in him. Nikki wondered if she could trust that anything she told him would stay in that room, and Nate assured her that Victor wouldn't have hired him otherwise. Nikki informed him that it was about Victoria and her ex-husband. Nikki recalled that JT had fooled everyone in the beginning, but he'd been a different person when he'd returned to Genoa City, and he'd taken his anger out on Victoria. Nikki continued that it had been subtle at first, like saying things to undermine Victoria's confidence, but it had eventually become physical. Nate became infuriated by the thought of a man laying a hand on a woman to do her harm, and Nikki lamented that she didn't know where else to turn. Nate could plainly see that Victoria was covering up her problems and hanging on to her anguish, but he didn't know what Nikki wanted from him, since he wasn't a psychiatrist. Nikki wailed that she was desperate, since she couldn't bear to see her child suffer, and Victoria just seemed to be getting worse. Nikki referred to Victoria's mood swings, including overreactions to things that normally wouldn't faze her. Nate thought it sounded like signs of post-traumatic stress disorder, and Nikki recalled Dylan's battle with it after being in the military. Nate explained that abuse could trigger similar reactions, since abuse survivors rarely dealt with the underlying trauma after the abuse stopped. He recommended that Victoria see a therapist, and Nikki reported that her daughter already was, but it didn't seem to be doing much. Nate mentioned a guy in Madison with stellar credentials who had a knack for getting people to open up, but Nikki didn't think it was the answer. Nate wished he could help, but Victoria had made it very clear that she wanted him to keep his distance, and he thought pushing her might stress her out even more. Nikki noted that Victoria had put up walls after JT had made her question her own judgment, and she thought Nate could get somewhere if he tore them down and earned Victoria's trust. Nikki regretted that she hadn't realized what was going on sooner, and she implored Nate to find a way to help Victoria however he could. On the Crimson Lights patio, Abby presented Arturo with a care package of travel items for his upcoming trip, and he marveled that she'd literally thought of everything. He teased that he wasn't going overseas but just checking out a few buildings with her brother, and she recognized that she'd gone overboard, but it was what she did. Abby cooed that she would miss him, especially since they'd been seeing one another almost every day. Arturo replied that he would miss her, too, and he intended to show her how much when he got back. He spotted Ray inside the coffee house and abruptly ushered Abby out. Ray watched them leave. Victoria entered the coffee house, and Ray intentionally dropped his pen as she passed by his table, but she didn't notice. Paul picked up the pen and returned it to Ray, and he followed Victoria to the patio. Paul voiced surprise that she hadn't inquired about any updates with JT since Paul had questioned her about her ex's return. She didn't like what he was insinuating, and he swore that he wasn't there to hassle her. Paul imagined that it had been frustrating for Victoria when the police hadn't been able to make an arrest when JT had been in town. Victoria declared her relief that JT was gone again, since she preferred to forget that JT even existed. Paul thought that would be easier to do if JT was locked safely behind bars, and Victoria wished that was possible. Paul questioned why it wasn't, and she covered by saying that she didn't have a lot of faith in the police after they'd failed to bust JT even after he left a trail of credit card receipts. Paul said he was truly sorry they hadn't found JT yet, and he left. Victoria returned to her office and plopped down at her desk. There was a knock at the door, and Nikki asked if it was a good time, but Victoria bristled when she saw Nate. Victoria told them to leave, since she'd made her position clear. Nikki revealed that she'd told Nate about Victoria's ordeal with JT, and a livid Victoria leapt to her feet. Nikki recognized that Victoria hadn't been herself, and she pointed out that Nate was an excellent doctor who was very discreet. Victoria yelled that Nikki hadn't had any right to share Victoria's private information with anyone, and she ominously asked if Nikki would like it if Victoria shared her mother's dark secrets with the world. Victoria reiterated that she was perfectly healthy, but Nikki was adamant that Nate was loyal to their family and would never repeat anything. Nate acknowledged that it wasn't a welcome visit, but he offered his assistance if Victoria needed techniques to help her sleep or someone to vent to. Victoria questioned how many times she had to say she was fine, and she snapped that she wasn't a victim curled up in corner, weeping. She asserted that she would live to fight another day, and she had a lot of work to do. Nate and Nikki left, and Victoria seethed. At the athletic club, Abby pressed to know why Arturo had rushed her out of Crimson Lights. He claimed that he'd wanted to repay her kindness, but he hadn't gotten her a going-away present,